Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Need Some Introduction. In today's episode, I'll be breaking down this most recent episode of The Last of Us, this seventh episode. By the way, last week I had said there were 10 episodes this season, actually only 9. So 2 more to come after this episode. This seventh episode called Left Behind. Right off the top, I want to mention that as I have recently been doing, I will be recapping the episode by myself if you're catching this very early. But if that's the case, do tune in. Later tonight, I will repost the episode and will be including a conversation with Celia, who was also caught up with this most recent episode of the series, and will also include a spoiler-filled conversation about the Amazon Prime series, The Consultant, a horror workplace comedy, satire, almost a comedy, I guess, starring Christoph Waltz. And we did watch it. It just premiered last week, and we will be discussing it because I think there's a lot to discuss there at the end. We will be getting to spoilers after a brief non-spoiler discussion, so do check out that series if you're curious. If you're only here to hear that part of the conversation, you found us during a search, are not watching The Last of Us, and don't want to get spoiled on The Last of Us, check the show notes for a timestamp to go directly to the conversation about The Consultant. Also, before we get into all of that, just a reminder that we have 2 more episodes of The Last of Us, as I mentioned. And 2 weeks after the wrap-up of The Last of Us, the premiere of Succession, which just was announced this week, will be the finale, the last season of Succession. And in the in-between week, the week between the end of The Last of Us and the premiere of Succession, both on HBO, I will be republishing a conversation I had with a friend of mine, a psychotherapist, Sarah, discussing her case study of this family. And I will definitely be bringing her back on the show to discuss Succession in greater detail, but have already recorded a conversation with her discussing the Apple TV Plus comedy series Shrinking, a workplace comedy about a group of psychotherapists. And I'll be publishing that episode later this week, along with our recap episode of Your Honor. That Showtime show also coming to an end, 3 more episodes of that. And then we will transition our coverage to Yellow Jackets, the breakout series from Showtime from last year, now back for its second season. Speaking of HBO, in our ongoing discussion of what is happening to the streaming rights of these shows, all these shows that disappeared from HBO Max, and the fear that they would just disappear. I mean, it is a legitimate fear. Shows will continue to disappear from these streamers. But some news. So these shows that have disappeared from HBO Max have resurfaced on Tubi. By the way, if you are not an HBO subscriber and want to watch some of these shows, you can also tell your friends, if you don't have HBO subscription and want to watch some of these shows, they're available there. So here's some of them. The most high profile, of course, was the disappearance of Westworld. It has now resurfaced on Tubi. Lovecraft Country, a series that got off to a great start, was very uneven based on a horror novel, another novel adaptation here at HBO, which has a few things to recommend it. At its best, it is a very strong show, definitely has some low points, but does feature Jonathan Majors, maybe the first time that he broke out in popular culture. And Lovecraft Country is now available on Tubi, as is Raised by Wolves, the Ridley Scott-produced series that unceremoniously was dumped from HBO, a show I could never really get into, but I do know it has its fans. So if you never caught up with it, you can still catch it there. But most importantly, I think I have a couple of friends of mine that are big fans of The Nevers on HBO. And the series had only 1 season produced, broken into 2 halves, and HBO never aired the back half of that first season. But now you can watch it. If you've been waiting on Tinderhooks to hear that, you can now watch it on Tubi. So the back half of The Nevers is premiering for the very first time on Tubi. I have a feeling, by the way, that Minx, which has a second season produced as well for HBO and never aired, obviously, will probably get its premiere on Tubi. Going back to Succession, interesting news this week, not only that this is going to be the final season of the show, but also that Jesse Armstrong, the creator of the show, mentioned that there might be a spinoff of Succession. Meanwhile, the head of HBO mentioned that he cannot imagine having a show where we're following one of the siblings, for example. So these 2 folks have got to get on the same page if we plan to see a spinoff of that show. I'm not sure I want to see a spinoff as described, but I never say never. I mean, you can make a good show out of anything. It's really about having good writing, and having a good vision. So sure, depending on where things land in season 4, maybe we do want to follow one of these siblings into another arena of culture, and maybe it becomes a political satire. Maybe it becomes a satire of startups or the cryptocurrency bubble. There's lots of opportunities. And I think Jesse Armstrong is very interested in these different facets of culture. So sure, you can make a show out of anything. I just don't think it would be the next thing I'd want to see. I would pretty much wait and see, but I would definitely be open to it. All right, as far as what to watch this week, upcoming on Wednesday, March 1st, The Mandalorian is back. Pedro Pascal, our friend from The Last of Us, protecting and shepherding another savior figure. Although I wonder just how much Pedro Pascal is involved day to day in the production of that show. I think he's in his house doing audio recording like I am right now, and occasionally shows up when the helmet pops off. But season 3, the trailer looks very exciting, looks like a much bigger and maybe more expensive, already an expensive show, but an even more expensive season of show, at least based on the preview that premiered during the Super Bowl. And that's coming back on Wednesday. So if you haven't caught up on season 2, or if you weren't aware, Pedro Pascal is all over your TV in yet another very successful series on Disney Plus, and that starts Wednesday. Something else that I'm very curious about is a series coming to Amazon Prime this very same week on Friday, or really Thursday night, premiering a series called Daisy Jones and the Six. Now, this series is a fictional history of this band, Daisy Jones and the Six, spanning a period of time from the 60s into the 70s, a period of musical history that I find very interesting and entertaining opportunity to explore this moment in history when the counterculture became the mainstream. It's based on the book written by Taylor Jenkins Reid. And unlike many series on Amazon Prime, for example, The Consultant, which drop all their episodes all at once, this is kind of splitting the difference, dropping these episodes in batches of 3, I believe. So it will be playing throughout March. Interestingly, you also have an actual album. So this is a fictional band, and there will be an album coming out, original music of the series coming out simultaneously on Spotify. Very interested in getting a feel for the show. I don't know if it's going to be good or not, but I'm curious. I'm interested in this period of music. There's a lot to explore here, to look at the cultural footprint of the music of this time. So I definitely plan to watch this show, at least initially, and see how it goes. If that sounds interesting to you, check it out. Daisy Jones and the Six, and featuring Riley Keough, for example, plus a large cast of recognizable cast members. And of course, she has a musical legacy since she is the oldest grandchild of Elvis Presley. All right, so a couple of recommendations before we get into this episode of The Last of Us. First of all, on Hulu, a movie called Prospect, a low-budget science fiction movie. A father and daughter are on a mining expedition to a planet or a moon somewhere, and this movie features Pedro Pascal. Victor, are you trying to tell me that this is another movie where Pedro Pascal is shepherding a daughter figure through some science fiction wasteland? Yes and no, because the father here is played by Jay Duplass, not played by Pedro Pascal. However, Pedro Pascal is a mercenary that they run into on the planet, and things go badly, as you would expect in these type of situations. And yes, indeed, Pedro Pascal and this girl start to bond against their better judgment. Now, this film isn't fully successful. It's pretty low budget. It was actually based on a very low budget independent film. They raised a few $1 million. Probably isn't fully satisfying as a standalone project. But I find it interesting in the context of what we're discussing here on the podcast. Obviously, seeing Pedro Pascal playing a very different type of role. Also, the fact that we've discussed how The Last of Us is really in many ways a Western. This film, Prospect, is absolutely a Western, although not a traditional Western. If anything, it feels a lot like The Treasure of the Sierra Madre, and it has some of the same nihilism that film has. A great film, by the way, if you've never seen it. And another thing to highly recommend this, and also intersects with our discussions here on the show, it stars Sophie Thatcher as this daughter who has now appeared in the Book of Boba Fett and plays young Natalie on Yellow Jackets, which of course is coming back in just a few weeks. Her performance is so good, it really elevates the material. The film, despite its incredibly low budget, actually does a really great job of placing you in this world. Some of the scenes, I can't even imagine how they shot them when they're, for example, detaching from the mothership on such a small budget, really beautifully done. and very convincing and very much giving you a first-person view of living in this savage wilderness. And her performance is so good. She adds a soulfulness to the film that reminds me of all things of Station 11, another show we've obviously discussed here on this podcast. And interestingly, it is a story about how you simply have to do anything you can to survive. But rather than that feeling cynical, like it often does in The Last of Us, there is a real humaneness to the film, specifically in this character who is so single-mindedly focused on surviving and yet has this real underlying sense of humanity, which once again dovetails nicely with our conversation on Station 11. And that, once again, is called Prospect. It's available on Hulu. And I recommend it, especially if you are watching these other shows that we've been discussing here on the show. Now, another recommendation I have, kind of in the same vein of Prospect, and unfortunately no longer available on Hulu. I was planning to make recommendations for Valentine's Day. One of the films I wanted to catch up on, which I had not caught up on yet, was called Love and Monsters, a film that came out right at the moment of lockdowns in our pandemic. And the reason it didn't make my Valentine's Day recommendation list was because it really turns out to not be a romantic comedy, although on its surface, it feels like it's going to be. It's about Dylan O'Brien, who has survived this apocalyptic event. There's a meteor that's going to crash into Earth. They have shot down the meteor, but inadvertently unleashed some kind of radiation that makes insects and amphibians, I guess now also, grow to enormous sizes. And you have these disgusting, gigantic insects now roaming the earth. And it hasn't exterminated all people. You can survive if you're smart. However, people are basically now much lower on the food chain. And the survivors live underground and make these communities and basically do not venture out unless absolutely necessary. And Dylan O'Brien's character is an odd man out. He doesn't have the right skills to live in this community. Everybody has paired up pretty much except for him. And he still pines for his high school sweetheart. And although he's never taken any kind of risks in his life, he decides to venture out and track her down and go on this journey through this post-apocalyptic world. And this is really charming, very funny. The special effects are terrific. I believe it got an Academy Award nomination for special effects. This certainly was expected to come out in theaters when you consider how polished these special effects were. But I think it went straight to Hulu, given the pandemic. Unfortunately, not available there anymore, but you can still rent on all the rental platforms. If this sounds interesting to you, I'm not that familiar with Dylan O'Brien. I did not watch the new Teen Wolf reboot. I think I saw one of the Maze Runner films, but I don't remember him standing out in any significant way. But he is really charming here. I think he does a great job of carrying this film on his shoulders. It's mostly him for long periods of time, him and his dog, really. It also features Michael Rooker here in a mentor type performance, different than he usually gets to play. And he's also very charming. And this is really sweet and very gentle most of the time, very funny as well. Not really the romantic comedy it sets itself up to be. It is more about how having a reason, even if it is something that isn't necessarily going to pan out the way you expect it to, having a reason to move forward in your life is essential, which again is another theme that we explore here in The Last of Us. So that is Love and Monsters, a lot of fun, much more lighthearted than some of these grim recommendations I've been making in the past few weeks. And do check it out. Unfortunately, not free to stream if you have Hulu anymore, but easily rentable on all major streaming platforms. All right, finally, let's get into this episode of The Last of Us. I haven't mentioned this before, but there's this interesting title sequence here where you see this fungus spreading. You can see it taking the form of people as if it's growing over their bodies. And interestingly, it ends with these two bulbous spores, the kind that emerge from people's heads in this show. And they're in the shape of a taller and shorter figure, like our two protagonists here in the series. As the episode begins, we are picking up immediately after the events of last week. We see some tracks with some blood streaks. It looks like Ellie has found a house nearby, an abandoned house, and has Joel in the basement of the house while she's tending to his wound. He's in pain and he's bleeding out, and he tells her to leave him, just leave him behind. she needs to head back north and go to Tommy, back up in Jackson, Wyoming. We suddenly see Ellie in a different circumstance. She is dressed almost in FBI or police sweatpants and sweatshirt, running drills in the gym, listening to Pearl Jam on a very chunky Walkman. This song, by the way, is All or None from 2002 because, of course, the world ended in 2003. There's no new music, not easily distributable anyway. So everything's from pre-2003. And I guess they're playing a little game here to think, like, is this Ellie now with some new group of people? But it's pretty clear. Indeed, it is a flashback to when she was back in the Boston QZ. Ellie gets into a fight with a girl. This girl knocks her headphones off and says to pick up the pace. She doesn't want to get punished again for her slacking. Next, we see Ellie. She has a black eye. She's meeting with Captain Kwong. He tells her she has potential, and he doesn't want to just punish her. She has the option to either take one path to be a grunt and end up bullied by these other folks for the rest of her life, or do the work and become an officer.
First path, you keep acting like a grunt so you get the life of a grunt. Up at dawn, walk the streets, walk the wall. You eat shit food, you do shit jobs, you take shit orders from your patrol leader, who'll probably be Bethany. And that'll be your life from now until you catch a bullet from a firefly or fall drunk off a roof or get your hair caught in a moving tank tread. There's the other path. You swallow this pride of yours. You follow the rules, you become an officer. You get your own room, you get a nice bed. We eat well, we don't go on patrol. We're cool in the summer, we're warm in the winter. And best of all, when you're an officer, you get to tell the Bethanys of the world exactly where to shove it.
Why do you even care?
I care because no matter what anyone out there says or thinks, we're the only thing holding this all together. If we go down, the people in this zone will starve or murder each other. That much I know. There's a leader in you. And one day it could be your turn. Or not. So which way?
And this is the first time we have this ongoing discussion in this particular episode. Celia and I have had similar conversations actually during our recaps. This idea, do you need a strong hand to keep people under control? Is there only this thin veneer of civility over this murderous monster under the nature of humanity? And that is the question we have here. This goes back to a pretty well-known story which has been misattributed to be some kind of Native American folklore, but it's not actually the case. Its origin is probably much more recent, but it is nonetheless a very powerful metaphor of the two wolves. And the story goes that a grandfather's talking to his grandson and says, there are always two wolves fighting within every person. One of the wolves is darkness and despair. The other one is light and hope. And he asks his grandson, which wolf wins? Or in some cases, they say the grandson is the one who asks the grandfather, asking which one of the two wolves wins. And the grandfather says, the one you feed. And this is this fundamental idea that humans have both of these natures within them. And I think that is something that's being explored here as an extended metaphor within the show itself. You can give in to despair and despondency and turn on each other. These wolves can turn on each other. Or you can work together collaboratively and believe in hope and build something new. And in this moment in the show, we have Kwong is of the opinion that people left to their own devices would give in to the dark wolf. Next, we see Ellie back in her room. Kwong had mentioned that she's been especially erratic in her behavior and angry for the past few weeks. We see her look over at another bed in her dorm, and we can suss out even at this point that she's missing her roommate, someone she cared for very much. We also see her reading a comic book. This is probably an Easter egg from the video game. This does not seem to be a real comic book as far as I know. She also has a Mortal Kombat 2 poster up in her room. That'll be important for later in the episode. Eventually, she falls asleep, and then someone sneaks through the window. Who is it? It's Riley, her former roommate. She's been gone for 3 weeks, coincides with that erratic behavior that Captain Kwong referenced earlier. This is Storm Reed, by the way, from many things, but probably most notable if you are an HBO fan, the little sister on Euphoria. She gives Ellie the lowdown. She's joined the Fireflies and shows her pistol to prove it. She says, I'll tell you everything. Just come with me. I'm going to show you the night of your life. Importantly, in the context of the show, especially the video game, Ellie has a tape by Aha. They sneak pretty clumsily and loudly out of this building, which probably is not that well monitored at all. Ellie asks Riley if she's afraid of the guards. Riley says, no, FEDRA's stupid. And then, of course, they nearly get caught immediately by a patrolling truck rolling down the street. They start working their way through this maze of alleyways around the building. Apparently, Riley has been doing this for many nights and knows pretty much how to get anywhere in the city, including cutting through an abandoned building. They stumble upon a dead body who has taken some old school liquor, not moonshine, but some of the real stuff from the before times, along with some cocktail of pills. And this is a new dead body here in the hallway. Ellie shows this morbid curiosity we've seen throughout the course of this show, and they do take his bottle of booze, which I believe is scotch, maybe Dilwini. I couldn't tell from the label. Drop me an email. needssomeintroduction@gmail.com, in case you happen to know. Immediately after they pick up the bottle, the body just collapses through the ground. It's kind of strange that this would cause this collapse. How much this guy weigh doesn't seem to be that heavy. Not sure. Regardless, when they get to the roof, they have a conversation here. Ellie mentions if that was the first time that Riley had ever seen a body. She says, no, of course, my parents. Maybe her parents committed suicide. Maybe her parents were killed by FEDRA. We don't get enough details there. But Ellie does apologize for bringing up this painful memory. Ellie also wants to know what happened. What happened to Riley? How did she end up meeting the Fireflies? And Riley tells a story one day when Ellie was in the hole, one night when Ellie was not there. Apparently, she makes regular visits to the hole. During one of these occasions, Riley was doing her usual sneaking around the city. A Firefly noticed her and was impressed by her stealthy skills, and she made the suggestion that she should join the Fireflies. And here Ellie makes the point once again to Riley whether FEDRA, as questionable as their tactics are, might be a necessary evil.
More people in QZ, so more apartments.
So FEDRA's not entirely bad.
Fascist stick bags, starving their own population.
Fireflies blowing up the storage depot didn't help.
Propaganda bullshit.
Yeah? So you don't bomb stuff anymore?
Not when civilians are around.
That's propaganda bullshit.
One, it's okay you don't know everything.
Agree to disagree.
And two, we're here.
The mall? You out of your fucking mind? They sealed that place off for a reason. It's full of infected.
If it's sealed off, then why isn't it sealed off?
And they head to the mall. Turns out this is where Riley's been planning this eventful night for her and Ellie. It turns out that as more people have arrived at the quarantine zone, FEDRA has been reactivating different parts of the grid and inadvertently reactivated the electricity to the mall, maybe not even aware of the reality. Riley says that she's going to show Ellie the 4 wonders of the mall. This is really a magical sequence. Just the idea of being in this moment in history where technology and basically all of history have been eradicated. When you imagine these kids growing up in the world where all they know is barely being able to scrounge out food day to day, and suddenly being surrounded by all these things they've probably only heard stories of. And some of these things I'm sure are magical to them. For example, Ellie's reaction to an escalator. Can you imagine? This is all pretty hilarious. Also funny to see the coming attractions, a poster for Dawn of the Wolf, this fictional film in this world, maybe alluding to the Twilight films with their werewolf storyline. Interesting that they use real music in references here in the series, but fake films. Maybe it's just a rights thing, or maybe it's another Easter egg back to the video game. Haven't played the video game, so can't say. Nonetheless, fun to have this alternate history represented here in the series. There's an interesting conversation here where Ellie wonders aloud, how come some of these shops got looted while others were not? And Riley says, I guess they looted the things they thought they needed the most. So sneakers, everybody took sneakers, but Bed Bath & Beyond and Victoria's Secret, pretty much untouched. Who needs lingerie in the apocalypse? So Riley had promised 4 wonders of the mall. Ellie had thought the escalator might be the first. And I think I lost count of how many wonders there are in this mall. But I think intentionally the first actual wonder on Riley's list was going to be the merry-go-round. And beautiful, this is almost certainly a set that they've built for the show. And this beautiful indoor merry-go-round. They drink some more. And there is some heavy flirting going on here. But every once in a while, Ellie starts to bristle against Riley and her decision to join the Fireflies.
Did you really leave because you actually think you could liberate this place?
Don't say it like it's some type of fantasy, Ellie. They've done it in the other QZs. Set things right the way they used to be.
Yeah, we could do that too. If you come back, I mean, we're like the future. You know, we could make things better. We could be running things.
You could be running things. I turn 17 next month. That's when you get your assignment. You know what Quan gave me? Sewage detail. Standing guard while people shovel shit. That's what they think of me.
Why didn't you tell me any of this?
I don't know. I panicked. And I ran. And the longer I was away, the harder it was for me to come back.
And obviously, in a very heightened way, this is the metaphor that is being played out in this episode and maybe across the series in general. How are you going to change things from within when the system tells you, yes, if you become an officer, if you start to run the show, we're going to change things. You get a new world. And maybe this is what people of this demographic deal with all the time. I mean, I, as an older audience member, can remember this time in my life when, you're going to college, for example, and people say, you're going to change the world. You're going to do all these things. You have the possibility of being all these things. And you go through the motions, you do what you're supposed to do. And then you realize that nothing's really changed. And then one day you find 10 years have got behind you. No one told you when to run. You missed the starting gun, as Pink Floyd says. And now you're just part of the machine, quoting Pink Floyd yet again. You do wonder, what was it all for? And I think, once again, in a very, very heightened way, that is what's being explored here, that a lot of young people deal with. Do you go with the flow? Do you try to change things from within the system? Or do you go outside the system? It's also very interesting to think about the fact that here you have someone joining a radical group, a terrorist group, maybe even, not for any really strong principle or belief, but simply because that's the opportunity she has. After this pretty heady conversation, they go on to the second wonder of them all, the photo booth. Looks like the chemicals inside have dried up a little bit. The image is not that strong. Once again, some pretty heavy flirting here, although they're very shy, these girls, to make the first move, either of them. Third wonder of the world, I believe this is the third wonder of the world now. The arcade. Of all the wonders, this is truly a wonder. And of course, they play Mortal Kombat 2. Riley has smashed open the change machine. There's infinite number of quarters. And then simultaneously, we have the camera panning through the mall, working its way into, I believe, a Halloween store. Some pretty creepy, shadowy imagery here. This is some of the creepiest footage we've seen. But then we see one of these fungus face monsters awakened by the sound in the arcade. And maybe this is the worst the special effects have looked. These look very much like foam applications to these zombie actors' face. So now this moment of dread starts to linger over the show, although the girls still have a few more moments of relief. The fourth wonder, I believe this is the fourth wonder now, or I've lost count because there's still wonders to come, I guess. Number 4, stop on this date. The pun book number 2. We know Ellie loves her puns.
What did the frustrated cannibal do?
Lay it on me.
He threw up his hands.
Give me it. I want to go. Okay. What did the triangle say to the circle?
Oh, you're so pointless.
Okay. How does a computer get drunk? It takes screenshots.
What are screenshots?
I don't actually know.
Okay, give me. Oh, here we go. What do you call an alligator in a vest?
In this moment of lightness, Ellie notices these handmade bombs, these pipe bombs. This turns out is where Riley's been stationed. So it's not just that she stumbled upon them all. She's staying here, securing them all, as well as keeping an eye on these explosives. By the way, we never get the punchline. What do you call an alligator in a vest? An investigator. An investigator. By the way, the frustrated cannibal punchline, very funny. But Ellie is very angry. Riley is now just a terrorist. And she finally tells her the real reason that she wanted Ellie to come. She's leaving. She's being sent to the Atlanta quarantine zone, and she wants Ellie to come with her.
Ellie, I'm leaving. They're sending me to a post in the Atlanta QC. I asked if you could join so we could go together. But Marlene said no.
Who the fuck is Marlene?
Marlene is the lady that helped me get... It doesn't matter. Ellie, I tried. Tonight's my last night in Boston.
Why did you bring me here?
Because I wanted to see you.
And?
And I wanted to say goodbye. This isn't easy, Ellie.
It actually is. You just did it. Goodbye.
Ellie storms off angrily, but as she's about to leave, she hears some screaming back in the mall. This is a total fake out for her and, of course, for us as well as viewers. It turns out it's just the Halloween shop. Riley has one more thing to show Ellie. They put on Halloween masks and dance around on top of the counters while listening to Etta James' version of I Got You, Babe. Ellie asks Riley one more time not to leave, and she says she won't. And then Ellie finally gives her a kiss, and then immediately apologizes, but Riley says, for what? And they have a tender moment. And of course, at this very moment, this is when Fungus Face attacks. Riley gets a couple of shots off, but eventually gets knocked down and loses the gun. Ellie is stabbing the thing in its side. What kind of education are they giving these guys in FEDRA? You have to go for the head, people. This should be zombie killing 101. Eventually, after going back and forth a few times, Ellie stabs this thing in the head, and she is so happy that she killed this thing. She's juiced on adrenaline, and you see this once again. I mean, she's a teenager, so not too surprising. You see this impulsiveness within her. But then Riley looks at Ellie's arm, and we see the bite. We've seen this bite before. This is the moment, of course, that she was infected. And then Riley shows Ellie her hand's been bitten as well. Now we start flashing backwards and forwards in time. Ellie is back with Joel, freaking out. She's looking for a way to save him. She's decided not to leave him. And we see that part of her decision is based on this experience she had with Riley.
What are we gonna do?
The way I see it, we got two options. One, we take the easy way out. It's quick, painless. No, I don't like option one. Option two, we just keep going.
What are you talking about, Riley? It's over.
It will be, but not yet. It ends this way for everyone sooner or later, right? Some of us just get there faster than others. But we don't quit. Whether it's 2 minutes or 2 days, we don't give that up. I don't want to give that up. We could just be all poetic and shit and lose our minds together.
What's option 3?
Turns out there is an option 3. Ellie is immune, but of course nobody knows this at the time. And of course, Ellie was emboldened in that conversation to stay, to fight to the very end, no matter how long that was. And that's what she does. She decides to stay with Joel. We've jumped forward in time to 2023 again. She's with Joel, stitching him up. He may pass out in the middle of this, I'm not sure. And that's where we end the episode. So this was another really strong episode after last week, dealing with all the complexity. Do you quit? Do you give up? Do you accept the fact that we're all going to die one day anyway? So why bother? Or do you fight? Do you fight to the very end, even when you know there is no hope? Because maybe, just maybe, there is something. There's something more, even if it's just having a few more moments together. I do wonder if on the show we will see more of Ellie's backstory. Still curious to know. I assume, this is my assumption, that Kwang protects Ellie. I think he's actually the one that probably eventually delivers her to the Fireflies. Maybe she wanders off with Riley only to watch her die, and she does not get sicker. And then who does she turn to? Or maybe she goes directly to the Fireflies herself. But more interested to see this story, because how tragic is it for them to be on this death run, spending their last days together before the infection takes hold, and for Ellie to watch Riley get sick and die and either have to run off on her own before she becomes a danger to Ellie, or Ellie having to kill her, or if she asks Ellie to kill her. Either way, a terrible experience that Ellie will have to endure, and then only for her to discover she's not even sick. She's not even going to change. A few takeaways from the featurette at the end. I like how Neil Druckmann, one of the writers of this series and the creator of the game, describes this as post-apocalyptic cutting class, a very interesting metaphor. It's very true. And also a mention, as I already stated, that Riley didn't quit on Ellie, and Ellie survived, and now she's not going to quit on Joel. Next week, coming attractions, more survivors seem to find Ellie. We still don't know what is Joel's fate. He seems to be unconscious or potentially dead. I don't believe that he's going to die in this season of the show. And then, are these people saviors? Are they some kind of risk? Is there a sexual danger? We have not seen any kind of sexual threat yet on the show, but maybe that is going to change next week. Things do seem like they're going to go badly there. Shades of The Walking Dead yet again. But I am curious to see how the show lands, and curious to see where this show ends up viewership-wise by the end of its run. In case you've been following this or have not been following this, the show just kept picking up more and more viewers. That uptick was disrupted somewhat by the Super Bowl, even though the streaming was made available earlier. HBO did not disclose total viewership for that week. But Nielsen now, which is always a month delayed, has started to publish its weekly ratings, streaming ratings. And between the Nielsen weeklies and the day of viewership on HBO across its different linear platforms, viewership is pretty close to, even through the first 3 or 4 episodes, pretty close to where House of the Dragon is, actually beating it on the streaming charts, by the way, week to week. And that is the most successful first season of a show they've ever had, the House of the Dragon, that is. So if this exceeds it, what a huge phenomenon this show would be. And a real surprise for me, I got to say. I did not think this show would have that kind of appeal, to be even bigger than a Game of Thrones spinoff. And yet it probably will exceed the total audience for that show by the end of its run. A shocking, phenomenal success. All right, so 2 more episodes now after this week. I do believe they are headed to Utah. I'm not sure how they're going to get there in just 2 weeks. Maybe that doesn't happen till next season, which would be weird, but I'm not sure how they're going to structure it. There will only be 1 episode after next week, and next week they do not seem to be in Utah. Remains to be seen how far they truly make it. And if you're catching this episode early, this is the end of the episode. But do come back later. I'll be discussing this same episode of The Last of Us again with Celia in greater detail, and also discussing spoilers for the Amazon Prime show, The Consultant. An interesting, not fully successful, but interesting series nonetheless, definitely worthy of discussion. And that conversation will be starting right now.